Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, the Bay Area's premier author interview program. And today we go into a program in which I have a problem, but let me give you the statistics first. We're going to talk about a novel called Damaged. It's more than a novel. It's a Maggie O'Dell novel, and the author, Alex Kava, is with us, and the book is published by Doubleday. Thank you for stopping by.
Thank you.
The problem that I have is that I don't know where to start, and I pride myself on knowing where to start, because to talk about Damaged, I find it difficult because I liked it so much. And I feel if I start yakking, I'm going to give the whole darn story away, and it's a thriller, and we shouldn't do that.
No, that's probably not a good idea to give it away, but I'm glad to hear you liked it.
Well, I'm going to talk about some stuff that your publisher sent us. It's about you in the book. Maggie O'Dell, the main character, is an FBI profiler. And the books that you've written about her have been published in more than 20 countries. It appeared on the USA Today and the New York Times bestseller list, as well as bestseller list in the United Kingdom, Australia, Poland, Germany, and Italy, and probably Afghanistan. And the other thing that it says then, right after it says that, is that you divide your time between Omaha, Nebraska, and Pensacola, Florida. Now, I find that exceeding strange. What's wrong with you?
It's a little bit twisted for a thriller writer to be going from one place to the other.
Yeah. And in this particular book called Damaged, your publisher says quite rightly, I agree with this, that you ratchet up the suspense in this book by sending poor Maggie into the eye of an impending monster hurricane to track down a killer. And it's, what do we call that, a Code 5?
Category 5.
Category 5. And so Maggie has been around for several books. This is number 8, and she's a special agent with the FBI. And apparently you're getting better and better at this because a fair country writer by the name of Lee Child says, read this gripping, can't-put-it-down thriller. O'Dell could be Reacher's long-lost twin. Now, for him to say that is a supreme compliment, although I don't think she's a twin of Reacher. I really, really don't. Do you think so?
No, but it's quite the compliment. I was very pleased when Lee took it upon himself to give me that quote.
One of the things is if you could have, sales like Lee does, that would be nice.
Yes, please.
Now, and it says here that you divide your time between these two very different places, Nebraska and Pensacola. Now, the thing that I want to get at is your hurricane experience, especially the community aspects of it, because in an interview you get into that. Mm-hmm. So tell us about that. Girl from Nebraska. You
would think that a girl from Nebraska would have enough experience with tornadoes that hurricanes would just sort of be kind of the next step up. But what really surprised me about hurricanes is how for an entire week you have this anxiety of this monster storm that is just plowing its way up the coast right at you. And you catch yourself saying, please turn, go hit Texas, go hit Louisiana, go hit someone else instead of coming this way. And 2 days before, there's this realization that it's not going to turn. It is actually going to come ashore. And that's when you really see people stepping up and starting to buy the plywood and board up and get supplies and start evacuating. And it was amazing to me to watch and to be a part of that and to feel that. And I don't think that you can actually experience a hurricane and then the aftermath of a hurricane and not be changed in some way.
That's the thing that I want you to talk about, because in the interview that you did, you talk about that you say that nothing prepares you for the aftermath. It's hard to explain. May sound a bit cliched, but there's a transformation that takes place.
There really is, because now take for a minute that you've prepared for 2 days for the storm that's coming right at you. And when the outer bands start, they can last up to 12 hours. And then when the actual hurricane begins, you can't go out during that time. And the actual hurricane can last for another 12 hours. So you are essentially boarded up in your home or someplace in your shelter for a good 12 to 20 hours, not knowing what's going to happen. It's pretty frightening.
And the thing is that I think that what you're saying is that the only way to get through this is through community, actually.
Oh, absolutely. And the community part comes in when the storm ends and you open the doors and you venture out and you see how much damage has been.
Well, we've got to get to the book Damaged, which begins with a very exciting scene. Our friend, Liz Bailey, gets dropped from a helicopter into very violent seas. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email JimFosterCoc@gmail.com.
Damaged, a Maggie O'Dell novel by Alex Kava. I was going to give you a full name there. That's what we're talking about. It's a wonderful novel called Damaged, and a very fine writer. And I think somewhere in the acknowledgments you say she's also a very fine reader. Tess Gerritsen has some wonderful things to say. Rip-roaring action, she says, that only builds in intensity with every page. Damage kept me so riveted during a long plane ride that I completely forgot where I was. Now that's the mark of a true thriller. It sure is. Congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah, that is the true mark.
Well, right now, as you sit here, you are a best-selling author of 10 novels. Damaged marks the 10th anniversary as a novelist. It did take you quite a while to celebrate your first anniversary as a novelist. In a conversation, you start out answering the question about how did you get published first. And you start out by saying, I had 116 rejections for a novel that remains unpublished. That's not so nice. What did you do from there?
116 is a good learning lesson, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a good learning curve, I guess. Yeah.
Very much so. In fact, I tell authors or writers who are trying to be published authors today, I said, you have to get at least half of my rejections before you can quit. But it takes a lot of persistence. Somebody once told me that to get published in fiction these days, it would be easier to win the lottery. And I can account for that. It was very, very difficult.
And finally, was the first book one of the Maggie O'Dell novels?
Actually, it was, and I never intended to write a series.
And here you are.
Maggie doesn't come into that first novel until the 7th chapter, I believe, and readers really seem to connect with her. The publisher wanted a series, and oh my God, I didn't know how to write a series.
These days,
They seem to, yes, and that was fine, but I felt like I was kind of learning by the seat of my pants how to write a series.
Well, let's get back to what goes on in Damaged. On Pensacola Beach, it says, the Coast Guard prepares for Category 5 hurricane that has entered the Gulf. When the air crew patrols the waterways, they spot a huge fishing cooler about a mile offshore. Drug traffickers have been known to dump coolers or fill coolers with smuggled product and pay fishermen to retrieve them for them. But when the crew opens this cooler, they're shocked by what they find: 2 decaying torsos. Now, this was brought up by the swimmer person. What's her name?
Liz Bailey.
Liz. And she dumped into the ocean, and she has to bring this thing up, and inside are 2 decaying torsos, and we're off and running.
Yes, and that's what brings Maggie down to Pensacola Beach, is to figure out what the origin of this cooler is. And Liz and her crew actually are starting preparations for the hurricane, and they see this fishing cooler, and they bring it up, and they really do kind of open it, take a peek inside, expecting for there to be drugs. Yeah. And it's actually a torso and several feet and hands that are precisely cut and wrapped in plastic.
Central to the plot, one might say,
a little bit
Damaged
so, yes.
is something called the black market of human organs. You know, when I was reading this, I said, this can't be. Doesn't the government control what happens to cadavers and stuff?
Actually, the government does control. There are quite a few federal regulations in place for organs. There is not, however, for any of the rest, bones, body tissue, anything else that people can harvest and use for research or use for some other sort of technological advances. And it actually is illegal to sell a body. It's not, however, illegal to process, to charge for shipping, to charge for handling, to charge for processing fees. And a cadaver that has been cut up into pieces can be worth up to as much as $20,000.
Some of the uses that the body pieces or the whole body are some of the uses that they're put to are very legitimate.
Very legitimate,
yes. They're educational, they're research and things like that. Now, why does a black market develop? That's what I couldn't understand.
Well, amazingly so, there is a huge demand for body parts for research development, and there is not so much of a supply because they have to depend on people donating their bodies.
That's true.
And there have been, in fact, there was a case about 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, a couple of New York funeral homes who were caught cutting apart some of their clients and taking body parts illegally, even going so far as to replace the bone with PVC pipe and sewing them back up.
It's a faster way to make money than funerals.
Absolutely.
Well, that brings us to a character that is very, I call him Slippery Joe Black. He's so smooth and he's so evil. But since it's a Maggie O'Dell novel, Damaged is guaranteed to have one strong female character. But Damaged introduces another one. You'll hear about her in a minute.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email JimFosterCoc@gmail.com.
This is Conversations on the Coast. Damaged, a Maggie O'Dell novel, is what we're talking about with the author, Alex Kava. The book that is published by Doubleday. Publishers Weekly says, in part, this intense thriller builds to an eye-popping revelation that will leave fans eager for the sequel. We will get to the possibility of a sequel before this segment is through. Now, before we get to the new woman hero in this book, I want to say a few more words. Well, I'm not so much interested in Joe Black. Joe Black is a sleazy guy who deals in the black market in body parts. And, however, he also gets to know, when he's in the Pensacola area, a fellow that I really, really admired, Walter Bailey. Now, this man runs something called the Coney Island Canteen. Walter Bailey is a nice guy.
Walter Bailey is actually the first time that I've ever based a character on a real-life person that I've known. And unfortunately, the real Walter passed away a couple of years ago, just shy of his 86th birthday. But when he first retired from the Navy, he was only 49 years old, and he was so bored. And he actually did buy and ran a Coney Island canteen, which was a mobile canteen that he drove up and down Pensacola's fishing bridge from 6 o'clock at night till 2 o'clock in the morning selling hot dogs and became known as the Hot Dog Man.
What a great idea. What a great idea. And in this book, he's involved with the dramatic ending of the story, and he's very lovable, very likable.
And he would appreciate that. He would really appreciate this portrait of him.
Now, there is another strong female character. Now, I don't know whether in other books in the series you've had really strong female characters, but I'm talking about Liz Bailey. Liz Bailey is actually Walter's daughter, and they live together. And Liz has been around in the Coast Guard, and she's with this new-to-her crew, and they're giving her the usual, we're alpha males and you're a woman hard time. And they throw her out into the rough seas. She comes up with the body part. And at the end of the book, in the notes, you thank the men and women of the Coast Guard, adding a special thanks to those few women rescue swimmers for quietly and bravely shattering glass ceilings that most of us wouldn't dare attempt. Now, is that how you see Liz?
Absolutely. There are even today fewer than a dozen rescue swimmers who are women in the Coast Guard. And the reason that you don't hear about them is because they very quietly do what they do and are amazing. I started reading a couple of articles about one or two of them. There was one who had done almost 57, I believe, rescues over Katrina. That's more rescues than most swimmers do in 3, 4, 5 years.
Well, that's the thing that was ticking Liz off about these guys, that she had worked Katrina.
Yes.
And now they're talking to her like she never did anything.
Yes, and all she really wants is for them to, instead of calling her the rescue swimmer, to be our rescue swimmer. Because even though rescue swimmers go down and they have to be very independent in handling the rescue on their own, they very much want to be a part of the team. They have to depend on that team reeling them back in. So that's what she wants more than anything, is to be a part of that team.
She's not only a great swimmer, however, she's a woman with great insight abilities. She sees weakness in our friend Maggie O'Dell, doesn't she? She
does, and it's one thing because Maggie is very stubborn about trusting people. And right from the get-go, when she meets Liz, they are going to take her up in the helicopter to see the crime scene. And Maggie's afraid of flying. That's one thing that I gave her that we share. And and she gets to the point where she's sort of asking them, well, it's the Coast Guard, can't we take a boat? I mean, it's almost that sort of desperation without really showing that she's scared. And Liz sees that. No matter how much Maggie's trying to hide it, she sees it. They're comrades in a sense, because both of them are women who have had to deal with double standards in each of their professions. And instead of becoming instant adversaries, they become instant comrades. Yeah.
It's really a beautiful moment. And then she slips her some pills so she doesn't spit up in the helicopter.
Yes.
Which is really very, very nice. Yeah.
Thanks.
So now, there are a lot of other people in this book who I find interesting, some of them. Others I don't care for at all. I don't like The Undertaker.
And you're not supposed to.
Oh, okay. But there's also, Maggie has a kind of love interest. And is he in other books as well?
Colonel Benjamin Platt, and he's a U.S.
MD,
doctor in the Army, yes. He shows up in Exposed, which is about 2 books ago.
Okay.
And he actually sort of took care of Maggie when I threw her in an isolation ward because she was exposed to Ebola.
Oh. And then he's working on the strangest part of the plot. what can these body parts do to harm people? Is that a possibility? And you say yes. Yeah.
It very much is. There was a case several years ago in Minnesota where someone received cadaver bone, actually, for a knee transplant and got very, very ill and died. So it gave me the idea of, well, if you don't have enough regulations, then how are we preventing this from happening on a catastrophic level? And that's where I came up with the plot for the secondary story in Damaged.
Well, the primary story is thrilling enough. And the other thing that makes this book really, really work and keep moving along is that it's calibrated, if you will, with the onset of the various stages of the hurricane.
Yes.
And we have fantastic news for everybody out there. First of all, you must read Damaged, which means you've got to go out and buy it. And once you read it, you can then wait and hope for the arrival of the next book called what?
Hotwire.
Hotwire. And
yes.
When is that going to see the light of day?
I believe about the same time next summer.
Wow. Well, get Damaged, read it, you'll love it. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and we've been talking to Alex Kava.
Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at Jim Foster COC and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.